Okay, I believe this is going to be Scrutinies Part 2 in the Red Book. So it's starting from the section number 3 on the bottom of page 336 in the 2009 publication. And so, yeah, what was the date? Is it still the 1st of August, 2025? Now, from there on, the voices of the depths. That was a good start, wasn't it? Let me try that again. From there on, the voices of the depths remained silent for a whole year. Again in summer, when I was out on the water alone, I saw an osprey plunge down not far from me. He seized a large fish and rose up into the skies again, clutching it. Okay, so now June 3, 1915. Um, in the interim, Jung wrote the draft of the preceding books of the Red Book. Okay, some details about what he was up to that don't seem that important. Um, anyway, June 3, 1915. I heard the voice of my soul, and she spoke. That is a sign that what is below is born upward. Soon after this, on an autumn night, I heard the voice of an old man, and this time I knew that it was Philemon. Philemon. A lot of footnotes going on. He said, I want to turn you around. I want to master you. I want to emboss you like a coin. I want to do business with you. One should buy and sell you. One should buy and sell you. Black Book 5 continues, Hermes is your daemon. You should pass from hand to hand. Self-willing is not for you. You are the will of the whole. Gold is no master out of its own will, and yet it rules the whole. Despised and greedily demanded, an inexorable ruler. It lies and waits. He who sees it longs for it. It does not follow one around, but lies silently, with a brightly gleaming countenance, self-sufficient, a king that needs no proof of its owner. Everyone seeks after it. Few find it, but even the smallest piece is highly esteemed. It neither gives nor squanders itself. Everyone takes it where he finds it, and anxiously ensures that he doesn't lose the smallest part of it. Everyone denies that he depends on it, and yet he secretly stretches out his hand longingly toward it. Must gold prove its necessity? It is proven through the longing of men. Ask it, who takes me? He who takes it has it. Gold does not stir, it sleeps and shines, its brilliance confuses the senses. Without a word, it promises everything that men deem desirable. It ruins those to be ruined, and helps those on the rise to ascend. A blazing hoard is piled up, it awaits the taker. What tribulations do men not take upon themselves for the sake of gold? It waits and does not shorten their tribulations. The greater the tribulations, the greater the trouble, the more esteemed it is. It grows from underground, from the molten lava. It slowly exudes, hidden in veins and rocks. Man exerts all cunning to dig it out, to raise it. But I called out, dismayed. What ambiguous speech, O Philemon! Now September 15. I'm not going to keep going on the dates because they come in and out. But Philemon continued, quote, not only to teach, but also to disavow. Or why then did I teach? If I do not teach, I do not have to disavow. But if I have taught, I must disavow thereafter. For if I teach, I must give others what they should have taken. What he acquires is good, but the gift that was not acquired is bad. To waste oneself means to want to suppress many. Deceitfulness surrounds the giver because his own enterprise is deceitful. He is forced to revoke his gift and to deny his virtue. The burden of silence is not greater than the burden of myself that I would like to load onto you. Therefore I speak and I teach. Hmm. May the listener defend himself against my ruse, by means of which I burden him. the best truth is also such a skillful deception that I also entangle myself in it as long as I do not realize the worth of a successful ruse. That was all Philemon. And Jung says, and I was startled again and cried, O Philemon, men have deceived themselves about you, therefore you deceive them. But he who fathoms you fathoms himself. But Philemon fell silent and retired into the shimmering cloud of uncertainty. He left me to my thoughts, and it occurred to me that high barriers would still need to be erected between men, less to protect them against mutual burdens than against mutual virtues. It seemed to me as if the so-called Christian morality of our time made for mutual enchantment. Huh. How can anyone bear the burden of the other if it is still the highest that one can expect from a man, that he at least bears his own burden? But sin probably resides in enchantment. If I accept self-forgetting virtue, I make myself the selfish tyrant of the other, and I'm thus also forced to surrender myself again in order to make another my master, which always leaves me with a bad impression and is not to the other's advantage. Admittedly, this interplay underpins society, but the soul of the individual becomes damaged, since man thus learns always to live from the other instead of from himself. It appears to me that if one is capable, one should not surrender oneself, as that induces, indeed even forces, the other to do likewise. But what happens if everyone surrenders themselves? That would be folly. Not that it would be a beautiful or a pleasant thing to live with oneself, but it serves the redemption of the self. Incidentally, can one give oneself up? With this, one becomes one's own slave. That is the opposite of accepting oneself. If one becomes one's own slave, and this happens to everyone who surrenders himself, one is lived by the self. One does not live oneself, it lives itself. You can do that again. Not that it would be a beautiful or a pleasant thing to live with one's self, but it serves the redemption of the self. Incidentally, can one give up? Incidentally, can one give oneself up? With this, one becomes one's own slave. That is the opposite of accepting oneself. If one becomes one's own slave, and this happens to everyone who surrenders himself, one is lived by the self. One does not live oneself, it lives itself. There's a footnote there which feels important. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, I always mess that up. Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Nietzsche wrote, it's hard to say, try saying it. The self also seeks with the eyes of sense. It listens too with the ears of the spirit. The self, capitalized, is always listening and seeking. It compares, subdues, conquers, destroys. It rules and is also the eye's ruler. Behind your thoughts and feelings, my brother, stands a mighty commander, an unknown sage. He is called Self. In commenting on this passage in 1935 in his seminar on Zarathustra, Jung said, quote, I was already very interested in the concept of the self, but I was not sure how I should understand it. I made my marks when I came across these passages. I made my marks when it came across these passages, and they seemed very important to me. The concept of the self continued to recommend itself to me. I thought that Nietzsche meant a sort of thing in itself, behind the psychological phenomenon. I saw then also that he was producing a concept of the self, which was like the Eastern concept. It is an Atman idea. This is extremely important because it shows how indebted to Nietzsche Jung really is. I didn't realize this. Anyway, as we were saying, one does not live oneself, it lives itself. The self-forgetting virtue is an unnatural alienation from one's own essence, which is thus deprived of development. The self-forgetting virtue is an unnatural alienation from one's own essence, which is thus deprived of development. It is a sin to deliberately alienate the other from his self by means of one's own virtuousness. For example, through saddling oneself with his burden. The sin rebounds on us. It is a sin to deliberately alienate the other from his self by means of one's own virtuousness. For example, through saddling oneself with his burden. This sin rebounds on us. There's a footnote. Again, in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche wrote, quote, "You crowd together with your neighbors and have beautiful words for it. But I tell you, your love of your neighbor is your bad love of yourself. You flee away from yourselves and would like to make a virtue of it. But I see through your selflessness." Okay, moving on. It is submission enough, amply enough, if we subjugate ourselves to ourself. The work of redemption is always first to be done on ourselves, if one dare utter such a great word. This work cannot be done without love for ourselves. Must it be done at all? Certainly not, if one can endure a given condition and does not feel in need of redemption. The tiresome feeling of needing redemption can finally become too much for one. Then one seeks to rid oneself of it, and thus enters into the work of redemption. It appears to me that we benefit in particular from removing every sense of beauty from the thought of redemption, and even need to do so. Or else we will deceive ourselves again because we like the word and because a beautiful shimmer spreads out over the thing through the great word. But one can at least doubt whether the work of redemption is in itself a beautiful thing. The Romans did not find the hanged Jew exactly tasteful, and the gloomy, excessive enthusiasm for catacombs around which cheap, barbaric symbols gathered probably lacked a pleasant shimmer in their eyes, given that their perverse curiosity for everything barbaric and subterranean had already been aroused. I think it would be most correct and most decent to say that one blunders into the work of redemption unintentionally, so to speak, if one wants to avoid what appears to be the unbearable evil of an insurmountable feeling of needing redemption. This step into the work of redemption is neither beautiful nor pleasant, nor does it divulge an inviting appearance. And the thing itself is so difficult and full of torment that one should count oneself as one of the sick, and not as one of the over-healthy, who seek to impart their abundance to others. Consequently, we should also not use the other for our own supposed redemption. The other is no stepping stone for our feet. It is far better that we remain with ourselves. The need for redemption rather expresses itself through an increased need for love with which we think we can make the other happy. But meanwhile, we are brimming with longing and desire to alter our own condition, and we love others to this end. If we had already achieved our purpose, the other would leave us cold. But it is true that we also need the other for our own redemption. Perhaps he will lend us his help voluntarily, since we are in a state of sickness and helplessness. Our love for him is, and should not be, selfless. That would be a lie. For its goal is our own redemption. Selfless love is true only as long as the demand of the self can be pushed to one side. But some day comes the turn of the self. Who would want to lend himself to such a self for love? Certainly only one who does not yet know what excess of bitterness, injustice, and poison the self of a man harbors, who has forgotten his self and made a virtue of it. In terms of the self, selfless love is a veritable sin. We must presumably often go to ourselves to re-establish the connection with the self, since it is torn apart all too often, not only by our vices, but also by our virtues. For vices as well as virtues always want to live outside, but through constant outer life, we forget the self, and through this, we also become secretly selfish in our best endeavors. What we neglect in ourselves blends itself secretly into our actions toward others. Through uniting with the self, we reach the God. And there are two relevant footnotes. The first, after this sentence, but through constant outer life, we forget the self, and through this, we also become secretly selfish in our best endeavors. In 1941, Jung noted, the integration or humanization of the self, as has already been indicated, is initiated from the conscious side by making ourselves conscious of our egotistical aims. That means we give an account of our motives and try to form as objective a picture as possible of our own being. I would, in passing, agree in terms of the prophecy. One becomes two, two becomes three. From out of the third comes the one as the fourth. This is about clarifying the third as an aperture, which is sort of like the object of desire. It's the willing, the driving, the self-directed. It's about getting clear about what that is and holding that. Okay, and then he was saying, what we neglect in ourselves blends itself secretly into our actions toward others. Through uniting with the self, we reach the God. Black Book 5 continues, which unites heaven and hell in itself. Also see Jung in Transformation Symbolism of the Mass, quote, the self then functions as a unio oppositorum and thus constitutes the most immediate experience of the divine, which is at all psychologically comprehensible. Anyway, it moves on. I must say this not with reference to the opinions of the ancients or this or that authority, but because I have experienced it. It has happened thus in me. And it certainly happened in a way that I neither expected nor wished for. The experience of the God in this form was unexpected and unwanted. I wish I could say it was a deception, and only too willingly would I disown this experience. But I cannot deny that it has seized me beyond all measure and steadily goes on working in me. So if it is a deception, then deception is my God. Moreover, the God is in the deception. And if this were already the greatest bitterness that could happen to me, I would have to confess to this experience and recognize the God in it. No insight or objection is so strong that it could surpass the strength of this experience. And even if the God had revealed himself in a meaningless abomination, I could only avow that I have experienced the God in it. I even know that it is not too difficult to cite a theory that would sufficiently explain my experience and join it to the already known. I could furnish this theory myself and be satisfied in intellectual terms, and yet this theory would be unable to remove even the smallest part of the knowledge that I have experienced the God. I recognize the God by the unshakableness of the experience. I cannot help but recognize him by the experience. I do not want to believe it. I do not need to believe it, nor could I believe it. How can one believe such? My mind would need to be totally confused to believe such things. Given their nature, they are most improbable. Not only improbable, but also impossible for our understanding. Not only a sick brain could produce such deceptions. I am like those sick persons who have been overcome by delusion and sensory deception. But I must say that the God makes us sick. I experience the God in sickness. A living God afflicts our reason like a sickness. He fills the soul with intoxication. He fills us with reeling chaos. How many will the God break? The God appears to us in a certain state of the soul. The God appears to us in a certain state of the soul. Therefore, we reach the God through the self. There's then two footnotes. Firstly, in 1921, Jung wrote concerning the self. This is in Psychological Types. Quote, but inasmuch as the I is only the center of my field of consciousness, is not identical with the totality of my psyche, being merely one complex among other complexes. I therefore distinguish between the I and the self. since the I is only the subject of my consciousness, while the self is the subject of my total psyche, which also includes the unconscious. Talked about that passage at length. In 1928, Jung described the process of individuation as self-becoming and self-realization. Jung defined the self as the archetype of order and noted that representations of the self were indistinguishable from God images. In 1944, he noted that he chose the term because this concept was, quote, on the one hand, definite enough to convey the sum of human wholeness, and on the other hand, indefinite enough to express the indescribable and indeterminate nature of this wholeness. In scientific usage, the self refers neither to Christ nor to the Buddha, but to the totality of the figures that are its equivalent. In scientific usage, the self refers neither to Christ nor to the Buddha, but to the totality of the figures that are its equivalent. And each of these figures is a symbol of the self. Extremely interesting. Don't really know what to say about that here, but it's that last part's from Psychology and Alchemy, paragraph 20. Okay, and no, that's fine. So we were saying the God appears to us in a certain state of the soul, therefore we reach the God through the self. Not the self, not the self is God, although we reach the God through the self. Not the self is God, although we reach the God through the self. The God is behind the self, above the self itself, when he appears. But he appears as our sickness, from which we must heal ourselves. In 1929, Jung wrote, the gods have become diseases. Zeus no longer rules Olympus, but rather the solar plexus, and produces curious specimens for the doctor's consulting room. That's in commentary on The Secret of the Golden Flower. Anyway, moving on. We must heal ourselves from the god, since he is also our heaviest wound. Ooh. I had thought a few days ago that we're most deeply ashamed of being unconscious, but this would seem to imply also that we're actually most deeply ashamed of being conscious. Like the shame, like the shame of shame of godhood, shame of godhood, but also shame qua godhood, which looks like our heaviest wound. We must heal ourselves from the God, since he is also our heaviest wound, connected also with solitude, aloneness, abandonment. Goes on, for in the first instance, the God's power resides entirely in the self, since the self is completely in the God, because we were not with the self. We must draw the self to our side. Therefore, we must wrestle with the God for the self. Since the God is an unfathomable, powerful movement that sweeps away the self into the boundless, into dissolution. Hence, when the God appears to us, we are at first powerless, captivated, divided, sick, poisoned with the strongest poison, but drunk with the highest health. Yet we cannot remain in this state, since all the powers of our body are consumed like fat in the flames. Hence, we must strive to free the self from the God, so that we can live. Black Book 5 continues, the God has the power, not the self. Powerlessness should thus not be deplored, but it is the condition that should abide. The God acts from within himself. This should be left to him. What we do to the self, we do to the God. If we twist the self, we also twist the God. It is divine service to serve oneself. We thus relieve humanity of ourselves. May one man carry another's burden has become an immorality. May each carry his own load. That is the least that one can demand anyone to do. We can at best show another how to carry his own load. To give all one's goods to the poor means to educate them to become idle. Pity should not carry another's load, but it should be a strict educator instead. Solitude with ourselves has no end, it has only just begun. It is certainly possible and even quite easy for our reason to deny the God and to speak only of sickness. Thus we accept the sick part and can also heal it. But it will be a healing with loss. We lose a part of life. We go on living, but as one's lamed by the God. Where the fire blazed, dead ashes lie. I believe that we have the choice. I believe that we have the choice. I preferred the living wonders of the God. I daily weigh up my whole life, and I continue to regard the fiery brilliance of the God as a higher and fuller life than the ashes of rationality. The ashes are suicide to me. I could perhaps put out the fire, but I cannot deny to myself the experience of the God, nor can I cut myself off from this experience. I also do not want to, since I want to live. My life wants itself whole. Therefore, I must serve myself. I must win it in this way, but I must win it so that my life will become whole. For it seems to me to be sinful to deform life, where there is yet the possibility to live it fully. The service of the self is therefore divine service and the service of mankind. If I carry myself, I relieve mankind of myself and heal my need from the God. And if I carry myself, I relieve mankind of myself and heal myself from the God. I must free myself from the God, since the God I experienced is more than love. He is also hate. He is more than beauty. He is also the abomination. He is more than wisdom. He is also meaninglessness. He is more than power. He is also powerlessness. He is more than omnipresence. He is also my creature. And there's just a little section here before we finish. It says, in the following night, I heard the voice of Philemon again, and he said, draw nearer, enter into the grave of the God. The place of your work should be in the vault. The God should not live in you, but you should live in the God. These words disturbed me, since I had thought before precisely to free myself from the God. But Philemon advised me to enter even deeper into the God. Since the God had ascended to the upper realms, Philemon also has become different. He first appeared to me as a magician who lived in a distant land, but then I felt his nearness, and since the God has ascended, I knew that Philemon had intoxicated me and given me a language that was foreign to me and of a different sensitivity. All of this faded when the God arose, and only Philemon kept that language. But I felt that he went on other ways than I did. Probably the most part of what I've written in the earlier part of this book was given to me by Philemon. Consequently, I was as if intoxicated, but now I noticed that Philemon assumed a form distinct from me. And I'm going to call that Scrutinies Part 2.